Hello, my name's Amy. I'm an indie author with 8 published books, or by the time this video goes live, it's very nearly going to be 9. And this is the second video in my Write a Novel With Me series. In this series, I am vlogging the process of writing a fantasy book from beginning to end, hopefully anyway. In the first video, I talked about the idea I'd had for this book, and I started brainstorming and developing it. Obviously, if you haven't seen that video, I'd recommend you go back and watch it. It will be linked down below, because I won't be backtracking a huge amount in this video. Or I will, but we'll get to that in a minute. Basically, this video is going to be a bit of a deep dive into some of my world building thoughts for this book, because that has very much been on my mind this week. It's probably going to get a bit complex and nerdy, but to be honest, that's one of the things that I love most about writing secondary world fantasy, so I make no apologies for that. Basically, I've had some big ideas for this book I'm working on for this series. Possibly some big stupid ideas. We'll see. We are going to have to actually backtrack a little to talk about something else. This will make sense, I promise. Back in possibly 2015, I started work on a book which has the project name Aeons. This is a book I've returned to on and off over the years. I think I wrote maybe 15,000 words the first time. I then made some quite considerable changes to it and went back and rewrote the first few chapters, but to be honest, I never got any further than that. Fast forward to last year though, and I started thinking about how I could put my unfinished stories into the Eterna world, which I talked about in the first video in this series. Eterna is basically the world that this book I am writing at the moment fits into. For the sake of providing readers with more continuity, I am hoping to put a lot of half-finished and half-formed ideas into this setting. So far that has been really successful. The one book that would never quite fit into Eterna though was Aeons. You see, Aeons was supposed to be 4 books. Each of the 4 books was going to have a different focus. We had a school story, we had espionage, we had kind of industrial workers' rights, and we had noble politics. The thing that tied all the 4 characters together though was the rediscovery of magic in this world. And this has always been my big stumbling block. Every time I've tried to put Aeons into Eterna, I can't, because there is already a developed magic system in Eterna. So I put Aeons aside and kind of thought I was never going to get back to it. I did really want to write this series because I'm very fond of the characters and there's some great world building involved. But I couldn't see a way to reconcile the magic systems, or rather the lack of and rediscovery of magic in Aeons and the much more developed magic system in Eterna. Because I'd come to the conclusion that I was literally never going to write Aeons though, I realised I could actually do more with it. I'd been clinging on to this idea that had been in my head for years, but there is no point keeping it in my head fully formed if I never write it. Far better to take that idea apart and reuse it in something else. Which got me thinking. As I said, there was a lot going on in the Aeons world, and a lot of things that had nothing to do with magic. If I take out or completely restructure the magical story that runs across the 4 books, maybe it will fit into Eterna after all. Now that's an interesting concept, but it's a little bit beside the point for this video series. Except, this got me thinking about the book I'm writing for this series, which is probably going to be called Scion of Shadows. Scion does not as yet have a very developed setting. It's going to be a city. Honestly, I hadn't thought much beyond that. But I started to think, if Aeons is in fact going to be part of the Eterna world, what if Scion takes place in the same city as Aeons? This was one of those light bulb moments for me. The world and setting of Aeons is much more developed than the setting for Scion. Using that city that I've already developed would give me a great starting point for Scion for jumping into this book. But that's not the only thing I've been thinking of. This is where the possibly stupid idea comes in. Aeons is 4 books. That has been set in my head for quite a long time now. This series about Pearl, the Scion series, I honestly don't know how long it's going to be. But I've realised I'm not sure I want to just set them in the same city. I think I want them to interweave with one another. This is complicated, I'm going to be honest. I'm doing something very ambitious, or I'm certainly considering it. I think I would like to have characters from both series crop up in the other series. I also think Aeons was always intended to make quite big changes to the city it's set in, which of course could potentially affect Scion too. Most complex of all, I'm wondering if the timelines could interweave. If maybe the first book in one series takes place, then the first book in the next series, going back and forth between the two. But at the same time, if I write it that way, I would like each series to stand alone so that you don't have to read both of them. And that is where the real difficulty lies. I'm not sure if it's actually possible to interweave 2 fantasy series to that extent whilst making them stand alone on their own. The other possibility, of course, is to write them as a single book, or a single series anyway. My initial reaction to that was just to say no. They are too distinct, even if I think they might influence one another. Aeons and Scion were never even supposed to be in the same world. So I'm not sure how I could tie them together into a single book or series. But the more I think about it, it does have some merits. It's definitely turning the series into something way more epic and large scale than I'd intended, but maybe that would be an interesting challenge. I think, honestly, either way at this point is going to be a challenge. We've got either 2 distinct series that affect one another, or we've got one massive epic fantasy series. Either one is kind of beyond the scope of anything I've written before, so I'm not entirely sure where to take this idea from here. The more I think about it though, the more committed I am to bringing Aeons into the Eterna setting and somehow rolling it in to the story of Scion. The shared setting has so much potential, and now that I've realised both series take place in this one setting, so many things are just slotting into place in my head. It just makes a lot of sense. But like I said, complicated, and I may come to regret the ambition of this project. I am going to be working on this project over the next week, doing some world building and trying to make sense of it all. But in the interest of keeping these videos at a sensible length, I'm going to wrap this one up here. I hope you've enjoyed this slightly nerdy look into my world building process and the inner recesses of my creative brain. I am digging up things here that I have not thought about in years, but it's all very exciting and it's nice to finally have a use for some of these stories. If you have any thoughts on what I'm attempting, or if you've ever done anything like this yourself, please let me know down in the comments. I will keep working on this story, or multiple stories at this point, next week, and I will check in with you again soon with an update. Until then, keep writing everyone, and I'll see you next time.